Poetic peeps and gentle persons, in-betweeners and non-conformers, genders all and genders equal. Welcome to Eat the Storms, the poetry podcast. My name is Damien B. Donnelly. I get to be your host and producer, and thank you so much for joining us today, whether that's been on places like Spotify, Apple, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts, iTunes, YouTube, or even Amazon Music. A very big welcome to the final official episode of Season 8, and I say official because we have some special Pride parties coming up later this month, as June is the month to celebrate Pride, equality and diversity. But today, I am delighted to welcome Matthew MC Smith to the podcast, the creator of Black Bow Poetry, and the reason we all come together on Tuesday on Twitter, now X, to celebrate Top Tweet Tuesday. But more about that shortly. We sat down last month to catch up, to talk about Beginnings, his debut poetry collection, 21 poems, all the way through to the Black Bow Poetry anthologies, to chapbooks and collections he's published for others as part of Black Bow Press, and we fell into a pitfall of pet peeves, which dug down into a big part of our conversation, which is why this is a bit of an extended episode, or at least it's an extended chat today. But as it's the Bard of the Bow, I think he might be deserving of a little extra chat time. So all that's required of you is to sit down, to relax, to make sure there's a pitcher of beer or a gin and tonic at hand, slice yourself some carrot cake, a chocolate cake, grab a cupcake or open a packet of biscuits. This is the final episode of Season 8, Eat the Storms, a poetry podcast featuring Matthew MC Smith, joining me, your host, Damien B. Donnelly, for our Behind the Storms chat. And I have a feeling there's a couple of surprise guests along the way, so I hope you enjoy the show. Today, for the final Behind the Storms chat this season, I am delighted to be joined by the one and only Matthew MC Smith, the champion of poetry not only in Wales, where he was born, raised and lives, but also on an international scale. He is the author of the pamphlet Origin 21 Poems, published in 2018, followed by the full collection The Keeper of Aeons in 2022, published by the Broken Spine Press. And most recently, Paviland, Ice and Fire, a pamphlet highlighting a campaign for the return of the Red Lady of Paviland to Swansea, currently in the British Museum in Oxford. Matthew has been nominated for Best of the Net, Pushcart Prize nominee. He is a R.S. Thomas Prize winner. And of course, he's been widely published in places like Poetry Wales, Baron Magazine, The Lonely Crowd, Iceflow Press, to name but a few, Arachne Press, Broken Spine Arts, and of course, he was our featured poet in the inaugural issue of the Storms Journal. Now, back in 2019, he began Black Bow Poetry, which encompasses the actual print, the Twitter sensation, or now X sensation, Top Tweet Tuesday, a weekly event celebrating poets, and also the Silver Branch series over at Black Bow website. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Wow, that was word perfect there, Damien. Slick.
I'm going to jump right in because this season we're all about beginnings. You know, we're all about origins. Why did our love of poetry begin? Why did we end up doing what we're doing? So as we've heard, you know, you are a writer, a mentor, facilitator, community builder, creator of that illustrious Top Tweet Tuesday. You started with online anthologies and then deep dived into printed pages. The listeners won't have been able to see, but earlier on I held up a stack of incredible Black Bow poetry anthologies, collections, pamphlets. It's astounding to see what you've created since 2019. Huge congratulations for that. But I suppose my question is, what was the impetus? How did it all begin? How did you decide to go, or why did you decide to go from just being a writer yourself to creating these extraordinarily connected global communities?
Damien, I think I just started at literally point zero. I was 39. I didn't know any poets. I didn't buy any poetry journals. I didn't really know any poetry journals. I didn't know how to get published. And I've been writing pretty consistently as a totally solitary activity since I was about 14. So So I probably had about 25 years worth of writing in files and boxes, and I still have it. Most of it, Damien, is absolute drivel. It's absolutely terrible stuff. But
looking for a couple now.
Well, no. Because you haven't seen it, and you never will see. You never will see the stuff, Damien. But yeah, I kind of started, I think, from a strange place and a strange angle, because I was 39, and one day I sat down and I did, as loads of people do, a 40 bucket list thing, and there were loads of things, climb up Snowdon, do this, do that, and one of them was I've got thousands of poems, literally self-publish a book. So I started backwards, whereas some people they write, they send their work out to this magazine or that magazine, or they start a blog. I literally started with a book, with a thin book that I worked on pretty much consistently for about 9 months. I had it ready for my 40th birthday. I self-published it. I sold about 45 copies to, I was just pressurizing friends, neighbors, everyone. Totally clueless, Damien, totally clueless. But one positive was that I had something to show people. I had something physically to cart around. And very, very quickly, I realized, I went on Twitter. I thought the only way to get this out here, in a wider sense, is to start on social media. And pretty quickly, after being on Twitter, I started to get traction. So yeah, I started from a very strange angle, probably. There were positives, there were some negatives with how I started. But pretty soon after that, I started Black Bow Poetry.
Just wondering, in terms, like you said, you have this wealth that we will never see, and perhaps any of our younger listeners listening in can, in 40 or 50 years' time, like go searching around the basement of Matthew T. Smith, do a deep dive.
No, don't.
But what's incredible to me is Origin 21 Poems. It is exceptionally crafted, it's exceptionally curated. I think very often when we want to sort of jump out and put together a collection or a pamphlet at the beginning, we want to sort of put, like, it's difficult not to put everything into it. But you very cleverly just, bare minimum to grab our attention. But what you have put in is so incredibly visual. Did you have help, or something that came to you? Did you just work on this yourself?
Yeah, totally solitary, Damien. I mean, I followed Poetry Wales, and I followed a few journals as a teenager, but in my 20s and 30s, other stuff totally took over. I had other hobbies, kids came, family, work, lots and lots of other sort of priorities. But I've always read stuff. But as I say, it was an entirely personal activity. And at the age of 39, I didn't know any poets at all. And I quickly thought, well, I've done this book, but I need to get some feedback. And also I was a bit concerned that I was relying on my reading from when I was in uni years and years ago. And I felt that I needed to engage more with contemporary writing. So I think that my first book, or chapbook, whatever it's called, I tried to be really modern, and I tried to be distinctive. But I think after, I thought, yeah, I do need to read more contemporary poetry. I need to engage with other poets. I need to upgrade basically to 2023. Well, actually 2019 then. So yeah, I mean, since then, obviously, I've heavily invested time in reading and meeting people, and I go to local stuff. I travel as well. I go to festivals and all sorts of things. So I would say since then, over the past five years, as soon as I did that book and I got some confidence, it was like, wow,
And now we're going to step away for a few minutes from our chat and welcome the first of our special guests on the show today. You might have noticed on the lead up to today's episode that I haven't announced any of the other guests on the show other than Matthew. That is because they are all special guests who are here solely to celebrate Matthew, which he doesn't know about. All the guests on the show today are here to pay their respects to him, to pay him some compliments, and of course to read work that he has curated and published. And that first guest needs no introduction, so I'm going to let her do her own introduction. Suffice to say that she is the light of our lives and the light of Dublin City.
Hello everyone, this is Rona Green here, and it's a real delight to pop into Eat the Storms and find my two very best Celtic bard pals, Damien and Matt, having a great chat about poetry, and what pure joy it is to be here to join in on the celebration of Matthew M.C. Smith. Thank you, Damien, for this lovely opportunity to sing his praises and to thank him for his poetry, his generosity, his enthusiasm, his publishing genius, and the wonderful community he has fostered on Top Tweet Tuesday. My own journey into writing is all down to Matt, whose encouragement saw me write my very first piece, which was prose and was published in Black Bough's Freedom and Rapture edition. And I then plucked up the courage eventually to post something on Top Tweet Tuesday. And that little poem, The Sky Road Home, sparked a truly wonderful poetry journey for me, becoming the opening poem and inspiring the name of their After Feather edition. And I want to dedicate this reading of The Sky Road Home to you, Matt. Matt, you are poetry gold. You are a rock star. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Damien, for everything you do. I love you both. Mwah. The Sky Road Home. Walked up the long gone avenue to my old gone long ago school. Found myself there under the chestnut tree behind the bicycle shed, rusty skeletal remains, fallen horse, chestnut brown, time forgotten, deep buried relics. Resurrected, a little russet red conker headbanger girl. Whose child is this, wheezed the unsettled breeze that rattled and shook the shivering leaves, still clinging to an imperceptible line of invisible trees, uncast at last from their long, dark shadows. She's mine, I exclaimed, and reclaimed myself. Light as a feather unfalling to bird, we took the sky road home. Together, feather after feather.
And from a luminary here in Dublin to the luminosity of Louisiana now, and a favourite guest here on the podcast and in the Black Bough community. We're now off to the United States of America for Jack B. Bedell.
Hey y'all, this is Jack Bedell. I want to thank Damien for inviting me to read a poem again on Eat the Storms, especially so in celebration of Matthew Smith, who's a bulwark of our literary community. The poem I'm going to read was written especially for Matthew and for our wonderful Deep Time anthology that I enjoyed editing with him. This poem's called Kate Mulvaney at Marsh's Edge. All swamp fades into marsh eventually. Trees turn to ghosts. Bushes give way to grass and then open water. The old woman who taught Kate to heal showed her how to find this edge where elderberry bushes and wild iris grew along the marsh grass. She knew the roots of these plants dug all the way down into the broth of life and death, sopping into everything under her swamp. These roots, coaxed to surface, make a bitter tea for the living. Thank y'all.
And it's time for me to be brave now and to attempt a poem from the bard himself. This is Daughters, and it's that poem that I keep going back to from Matthew's debut collection, Origin 21 Poems. Daughters. As they play in the ash-white light of noon, I hear that I am a part of their story. I am a character in their chatter amid light footfalls on earth. And later, I am forgotten in the chase and care of climbing, and when overcome, they reach up and rest head on my shoulder. Soon, I can just about move as they cling and bob to the motion of their walking ship.
I think I'm trying to remember how we first sort of connected. I know I was in Yoke, which was one of the maybe second or third online anthology.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I had found you already through Top Tweet Tuesday.
But what came first? Did Top Tweet Tuesday arrive first in the community build?
Came Black Bow the other way around.
No, Black Bow poetry started because what I realized quickly was that if you want to get read, it's not always enough just to broadcast your stuff. If you look at most of the people that actually get read, they occupy some sort of role. They have some sort of influence, and whether that's running a journal, or they run an arts organization, or they run a open mic night, it can be there are so many ways to do it. But I think pretty quickly I realized, if you want to get read and if you want to mix with people, start a press. The other thing is that I went on Twitter, and writers love nothing more, Damien, do they, than having a big whinge about getting rejections. We all do it. I'm not criticizing poets, but in that first year, there were lots and lots and lots on Twitter of really mopey poets then. And I thought, well, if I start a press, it's one more opportunity for people to send work. So half of it was altruistic. I can help other people. Half of it was, if I start this press, I'm going to learn about contemporary poetry. And I'm going to meet some really interesting characters. And coming back to you, Damien, I remember when I first came across you, you sent your work, you sent this extraordinary poem, and you sent this very cool photo of you. And I read your bio, and you were this pattern maker on the catwalks of Paris. And I thought, hang on a second, I live in Swansea, someone like me is getting poems from pattern makers in Paris. This is fascinating. And you sent that poem, and I eventually put it forward, I think, and it was really difficult to choose because I had hundreds and hundreds of poets to choose from. But I put your poem forward for Best of the Net.
Yes, my God.
And that would have been maybe in 2019, 2020. But straight away, I think, even though it's social media, you can tell who you get on with. You can often tell who you don't get on with, and you can tell who you would. And I always felt with you that if we went out on a night out somewhere, it would be bonkers and we'd have a right laugh.
Yeah, and I would teach you how to do a catwalk walk.
No, that is a terrible thought.
That is the best thought ever. We would need a video recording just for proof.
And now it's time to take another break from our chat and welcome some more special guests to today's episode. And for this, we are heading across the Atlantic once more to the United States to welcome my own personal muse from WordPress and a beloved Black Bow contributor. With her own greeting and reading format, this is Meryl D. Smith.
Greetings from across the sea in New Jersey to the Irish bard and the Welsh bard, Damien and Matthew. I'm going to read my poem, Bird Dawns of Time, which is from Sun-Tipped Pillars of Our Hearts, the Die Fry Award for Mystical Poetry from Black Bow. Bird Dawns of Time. The black hole burps light. A hiccuped paradox. Proof that the densest darkness contains a glow that sparks and evolves like love. As a wide-hipped prehistoric swan was shaped over generations, cradle-backed to rock her babies across long-gone seas, and that swan ship of mother love sailed into the black hole of time, tossed a bone anchor, and took harbor in my mind with feathered glimmer and a wing flap, red shifting, but not gone, transformed. Thank you. Now I'll just flap back to New Jersey and sit back and listen to this wonderful show. Bye-bye.
And from the United States, we are heading to the United Kingdom for another glorious community contributor and supporter. And today, he's here with us to read a poem that Matthew published in the Top Tweet Tuesday anthology, Sound and Vision, in spring 2023. This is a poem that Matthew favoured so much that he actually nominated it for a Best of the Net. And I'm delighted to welcome back to Eat the Storms today to read it. A true storm trooper. This is Julian Day.
Meg time. Sit tight, child, before colossal darkness takes the frame, swallows you whole, disappear down a deep trench of teeth, feasted like time on your own coastal table, like so many ghostly mandibles tearing past your disappearing fin. For millions of years, you never saw this one coming. How hunger tears you up in a rage. A razor tooth held aloft by a boy on a pebble beach. The very last of you.
And now it's time for me to go back in time and travel back to Yoke, to the third anthology from Black Bow Poetry and the first time that Matthew published my work, Blind to All Before Birth. The light broke while her waters fell, tears flowing from a hold that couldn't be held. Religion didn't welcome once before wedlock. Tell a bucket it's broken and it will not be able to bear its burden. Ties snapped and time slipped in between us to drown out connection. I was born and you left to bury the burden in your belly, and I wonder if you still caress the scars from the cord that was cut and the kid you couldn't continue to cradle. The light broke and I was born, blind to all that bore me. Next up, we have another familiar voice to the podcast and to the Black Bough poetry community. He is an ecologist, a philosopher, a poet and a guitarist who has appeared in the Black Bough publications including Freedom Rapture, Dark Confessions and Christmas and Winter Anthology. I am very pleased to welcome back to East the Storms to celebrate Matthew MC Smith. This is Andy McGregor.
Hi Damien. It's a privilege to record something for Matt, who's not only a great poet but has been a fantastic champion for poets and poetry over the last few years. This poem is not from one of the Black Bough anthologies, but appropriately does contain some blackening boughs. It's called The Last Word. When my voice is only a sigh in the yew tree, then they will read it. The words will be to them like the far oak boughs blackening in a storm, twisted, dark, and out of reach now as the tears fall at the sound of my voice in the yew tree, whispering, "It was meant to be funny."
Now we are sticking on the subject of Top Tweet Tuesday, and we have a poem from Duet of Ghosts, and here to read it is its author, the creator of Suburbia, I Am, another extraordinary community builder and remarkable writer. This is Mark Anthony Owen.
Parody. Kite tassels slipped from your string, you buoy on the breeze, living confetti. Celebrating the simple fact of being here at all, a bow of wing. No thought of how you're using your time, how fast you're going.
For me, what's the extraordinary thing, and I think I hosted Top Tweet Tuesday twice. I remembered the second time just. The first time was probably near 70 or 80, I think. And then the second time it was way, I don't know whether it was close to 200, but I remember just going, oh my God.
It was probably, it was easily 130, probably 130, 140 poems to read and comment on a Tuesday.
But
tough job.
What you do, it's extraordinary what became this. Oh, there's this thing going on a Tuesday where, you put a picture of your poem and then you share it and other people comment on it very positively and then you do the same. And, that was good last week. I'll try that again this week. To literally you becoming friends with these people, you gaining a knowledge and an insight in these people because of what you're sharing. The extraordinary thing of it, every time I've hosted it, I've rarely come across a poem where I thought, oh, I don't know what to say. You seem over the years to have drawn this extraordinary talent. And also, I think people come to you knowing, and again, looking at all these books that you've put together, that you've edited, that you've curated, you do you strike me as being a perfectionist. You do everything so well. I think people come to you because they know that they have your support. They know that they have your honesty, and I'm going to come back to honesty in just a moment. But I think there's a trust with you, and you have built that up over the years. It's incredible.
With Top Tweet Tuesday, I mean, one of my gripes coming into, I suppose, more public poetry after being this really solitary person is how boring the world of poetry can be in some cultures. In some cultures it's absolutely explosive, and it has a huge role, but I am worried about kind of how the role of poetry is even in Wales. People think outside, oh yes, but Welsh people are naturally poetic and they sing in choirs and they kind of scurry down to mines to mine out their poems and all that kind of stuff. But Actually, I am worried about poetry always becoming just a kind of posh hobby, or an intellectual hobby. So what I wanted was energy. I thought, right, I'm going to do something. I'm going to do every week. Nothing ever happens on Tuesdays. I don't know if you realize this, Dave, but nothing ever happens on Tuesday. So I thought, right, I'm going to jazz up Tuesday for serious poets, and I'm going to have something. Oh, what about Top Tweet Tuesday? Yeah, okay. I'll set up something called Top Tweet Tuesday, and I'm going to ask for poems. I'm going to have a different host every week, and I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to just set some basic rules and try to have a safe space. So I think I hosted Top Tweet Tuesday for about 7 or 8 weeks, and it drove me crazy. So very, very, very quickly, I called in all of the experts. So I called in all of these hosts. But for me, it's like a global poetry fest every Tuesday. Obviously, it's become a more niche platform over the past 2.5 years because it got too big. At one point, I think the tipping point was that a host had to comment on 145. I think it was Christina Thatcher or Marielle Stanning or something, or probably you. It was like 145 poems, and some of them were great, and some of them were not good. They weren't. A lot of poets had clearly just done very rushed jobs because they wanted to be part of it, right? And I thought, right, I need to bring this in line with what I do in Black Bow. So I did. And the quality of the poems, I feel, is absolutely mind-blowing. And that's what attracts people, is because the invention, the fact that people want to be quirky, they want to be distinctive, people want to run 1,000 miles from cliche. That's what attracts people. But also because if they post their own poem, normally they might get 5 likes or 10 or 15. But if you put it on Top Tweet Tuesday, you should get 20, 25. You could be on 60, you could be on 80, you could be like someone like Helen Laycock or Louise Machen, and you're on 80, 85 likes, 35 comments. It's serious traction really for what is still a very small niche hobby.
You said something very interesting there, and I suppose I wasn't thinking about it when things changed at the time. But in terms of the host, I suppose, if we say 140 poems, that doesn't seem like a lot, but you have to read that poem, you have to understand that poem, you have to comment on that poem, you have to give some kind of feedback. And sometimes a poem can be very straightforward. Sometimes a poem needs like 10 readings before you have it, and then suddenly you're in and you're addicted. But you have to comment. So I get, yes, that 145 times, excruciating.
When people host Top Tweet Tuesday, they get seriously looked up to on that. And people, because I will boost that poet, people will find out about that person's life, their work, their pets, their favorite books. They'll see photos of them. And so people get this insight and they're fascinated. But almost every host I've had has missed it afterwards because it's been a wild ride. So how did you find it, Dave?
I found that opioids helped afterwards because, why not? The come down was extraordinary. I remember the first time sort of waking up at about like maybe 6 a.m. and thinking, oh, I should just check because I don't know when it starts, but I think it's probably daytime somewhere and someone will be doing it. And like they were already in, and I thought, oh god, there's a few people already in, and you like going to do that and then thinking, well, I'll go and have a shower, and then coming back from the shower, like I was in the shower for 10 minutes, and there's
phone is literally shaking
constantly, and it's exhilarating. Like by sort of 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, when the fingers, have just like gone in, literally reformed around the phone, and you think it's never going to leave these hands. You're on a high, but it's it's a complete adrenaline rush. It's like doing a marathon and you have to keep going. But the thing is, you want to keep going because there is so much extraordinary poetry out there, and like there are so few platforms. And this is a platform that is not necessarily, you don't have to have been a published poet in order to take part. It's let's join the community. And I think for me at the beginning, especially because I also came late to poetry, finding a community where you were accepted in from the start and then could learn and grow, that was extraordinary to be involved in. But also when you're reading, over 100 poems, you're learning, you're picking up, and I'm reading things like, oh my God, that's an amazing line, or that's an amazing way of like describing something. And suddenly, you're doing your own homework, and you're coming into contact with these amazing poets who you wouldn't have found before on every single continent. Everyone is reaching out and connecting.
Now it's time for another Welsh poet to join us on this special episode, which you may have figured out is entirely dedicated to Matthew MC Smith. This poet will be reading a poem of hers, the first that Matt ever published, and she will also then very graciously read a poem called Blue Skies, which was written by the dearly departed but much beloved Carrie Flickinger. Together, Carrie and this poet, along with Matt, co-edited Black Bough Poetry's Freedom Rapture anthology. From the Isle of Inishmon, this is Ness Owen.
The sun turn of summer at Bryn Celli thee. Only a moment of solstice light, a transitory break in the clouds, was enough to lift the darkness, ignite the chamber, a gift from the waning sun. Blue skies. Blue skies drives me home too late one night. It is the first time I touch word by word, mouth myself inside each uncurling note. Provocation triggers apple seeds. I have never seen the sun shine as brightly as this sharp clip and chatter. Bluebirds flood into the night. My chest expands into pitched guitar.
To Cardiff now, we are off to the recent guest editor of In Flight from Black Bough. This is our beloved writer, tutor and editor who was the managing editor of Nightingale and Sparrow and the former coordinator of the Gloucestershire Poetry Festival. Today she is here to read her poem Precious, which was featured in Deep Time Volume 2 in honour of Math. This is Marcel Newbold.
This poem is from Deep Time Volume 2. Precious. I wonder what I would leave for the gods, those who own this place, their breath still present thick within these liquid walls. A blood-stained needle for sewing her dresses, a flint-tipped arrow for his heart, a boat hollowed from ancient for journey's end.
And now I'm going to read a poem called Dancing Alone. This comes from the collection Under Photon Crowns, and it was the first collection that was published by Black Bough Poetry. And I'm reading it in memory of its author, Di Fry, who died just as the collection was coming out back in 2021. So this is Dancing Alone. In the long earth, a spirit breaks soil, casts a shadow under majorial skies. In these windy, daisy lands, I dance alone. Sky larks sing to dry grass nests. their hymn, bright song, my muse. Russet and green leaves applaud, crown shakes in rapturous dance, for the tree that moves remains a tree at heart.
I do have to ask you, though, I have to say for our listeners, and I will, apologies, listeners, but I am going to say, what the fuck is an Imagist poem? So you started off, it was open to everyone, everything could come in. As you said, you did get a mix of everything. So you had to narrow that down, one for the host, but also, just in terms of, the content that you're getting. Give us a definition, give us your take on an Imagist poem, please.
Okay, so I'm not prepped for this, and if you asked me this in half an hour, I would have a different answer. Yeah, as you said, in the early days, literally, I think any poem or any form or type of poem came in, and to be honest, I found that the quality was incredibly variable, because you'd have people who had been, let's say, published with Black Bow Poetry or other presses, who would post like previously published work or just really excellent poems. And then in the mix of that, there were some people who were just posting very rushed off work, I think, to be part of something. But it got so big, I thought, right, I'm going to have to control it. And I think actually it was a really good opportunity to bring what I do with Black Bow Poetry, which is extremely Imagist focused, and Top Tweet Tuesday into line. And what it actually meant was that people probably had to take stock a little bit more before they posted, but it also meant that people would have opportunities to submit for Black Bow, because I take submissions sometimes from Top Tweet Tuesday. But coming back to your question, so if anyone knows about the Imagist movement, they were a group of early 20th century writers, led by writers like T.E. Hulme, and then Ezra Pound, Richard Aldington, Amy Lowell, H.D. And they were a group of writers who wanted to break away from the Victorianism, from the Georgianism of very flowery poetry and very kind of rhetorical poetry. And what they wanted was a more modern, kind of direct style of poetry that was impactful, that wasn't flowery. And what they had a focus on was, I suppose, instead of personal expression, using metaphorical language and trying to be inventive, trying to break away from vagueness of language, and trying to create, I suppose, more potent language that foregrounded above personal expression the image and how potent that can be. So what you find, I think, with really, really excellent writers who follow this kind of vein of writing, it is highly vivid visual poems that are metaphorical. They can be literal, they can be rhetorical, but mainly I would say they are highly visual, inventive poems.
All right. I hope our listeners have been paying attention. This is what we're looking for every Tuesday. Be specific. He will be annoyed if you don't.
Wake up. Come on. You can do it.
Now, I checked in with our next Devon Delight to see if it was okay for me to read 2 poems from her collection, The Poet Spells Her Name, and she gave me the go-ahead. This collection was published by Black Bear Poetry last year, and I am delighted that Sarah Connor, its beloved author, has let me read 2 poems from it. So this first poem is called You Try to Photograph the Moon. You write a poem about the taste of peaches, the way it feels to slice an onion. You paint the sound of starlings passing overhead, the way the wind moves across a wheat field. You weave a net to capture love and sunlight. You strum the leaves. You try to photograph the moon. And the second poem from Sarah Connor's collection, The Poet Spells Her Name. And thank you once again, Sarah, for letting me read these poems and sending all my love to you. This is Oh My Cartographer. Map me. Look for the volcanoes that yearn to burn. Measure them and the lakes, lacunae looking to overflow. Track my wilderness, my emptiness. Let your fingers follow the tracks carved into my ground. Monitor my glaciers, the depth of my ice, the heat of my deserts. Seek out my cities, their domes and glittering towers. Walk through my gardens. Remember them. Remember how streams ran through them, heavy with roses and the scent of honey.
And speaking of, in one sense, we're talking about building communities, bringing people together, collaborating. The extraordinary anthologies from Deep Time, the now celebrated Christmas and Winter anthologies. And I was giving a workshop 2 weeks ago here on the edge of Dublin by the sea, and someone went, "Oh, I was in like Christmas and Winter anthology, like volume 2," and I was like, "Wow, fantastic, bring it on." But in between all that, you have never been shy from sharing an opinion. Those opinions, are a key part now to Mr. MC Smith.
Probably yes. Sorry.
Yes, you did have your own fantastic podcast.
Did
let us in on I don't know whether the real side or the true side of Matthew, but perhaps less diplomatic. So today, what is it that gets under your collar? What are the pet peeves? What are the biggest things that really take the piss for you in terms of poetry?
Do you really want to know? Because once I get going, it could get awkward.
I will say I'm a little scared. There is an edit button that hopefully can go.
Okay, right then. Okay, so pet peeves. I've got absolutely loads. Having been a writer, I would say, for 6 years now, and particularly in the editing role, and then the social media mogul, whatever, curator, social media person. Loads, absolutely loads. So I suppose the first thing is, if we focus on social media, some of the habits poets have on social media, and it's only some, Damien, right? But I've got to say this. I'm going to say this. One thing I cannot bear is poets on social media who only boost important poets. And it doesn't matter if that really important poem, that prize winner, maybe they judge competitions. It doesn't matter if they post a really average poem or actually a poem that's not great. It's all, oh, this is wonderful. This is incredible. And then someone else who's just, maybe they're not published. Maybe they haven't got much confidence. They don't have any traction in the poetry communities. They'll post something that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Or lots and lots of people are like that. And they ignore that. So people who only boost important poets. My second bugbear, I suppose, is highly strategic poets. No, cannot bear them. Cannot bear highly strategic poets. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a plan. I don't think that there's anything wrong with being focused or having particular objectives.
Mm-hmm.
I could rattle off loads, Damien. I could spend 17 hours telling you all of my goals, right? I definitely will. But on the poetry scene, you can identify some people who you can tell want to know the right people, and they will ignore people maybe who, I've even seen it publicly, seen it in festivals and things.
Mm-hmm.
You can identify the highly ambitious, strategic ones who are going for those important people, or on social media they are as well. And it's cynical. At the end of the day, poetry is a creative art. And I think that kind of level of strategy, kind of game plan, it can be sometimes, for me, a very off-putting thing.
I have to say it's hugely alienating, and I think because my intention, and also why I was attracted to Black Bear in the first place, was this sense of community. And I think if you think that your proximity to the stage is going to make any difference, I think your proximity to a community is something that's going to help encourage you, it's going to help expand you. But your proximity to someone who's standing on a stage, and whether that's going to get you onto that stage quicker, I don't necessarily think is going to.
I think it does work. That's the thing that gores me, is that I think sometimes that can work. I think some poets are very, very good at schmoozing, very, very, very good at getting into, I guess, elite circles. And also I find, as an editor, 95% of people are amazing, absolutely lovely. But there are a very small portion of people who suddenly become your best friend because, sadly, they want something. The other thing is, I mean, my massive bugbear is plagiarism. I absolutely loathe it. I don't understand it. I recently contacted a press about plagiarism, and it's not something I would talk about to anyone but that press. But a lot of editors and a lot of people are passing it on. And if people do overly crib a poem, or they plagiarize it, or they semi-copy it, or they're too heavily influenced by a poem, it's really stupid. It's really stupid because there are some really well-read people out there. And only this week it's come up. Last week it came up with someone else. And it's like the height of stupidity. If you're going to do it, if you're going to become a writer, what's the point in copying someone else? It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. And cribbing, copying, it totally sucks. And that's a huge pet peeve. So
How are they like in terms of approaching you? In terms of, I think generally people know how well read you are. I think generally people know how many submissions you have, how many, you know, as we've said now, how many people are taking part in Top Tweet Tuesday every week. It seems extraordinarily naive of people to not think that you, as who you are not going to recognize what they're doing.
I think I'm just one. I'm just one of so many presses out there. There are thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of, and there are people who don't even work or run for presses who are extraordinarily well read. Now, I guess cutting people slack. I do think that there are accidents, and I can see how people accidentally regurgitate maybe a line or a phrase or an image. We probably all do it, or we've had experience of doing it. But when it comes to almost a whole poem, 20, 25 lines, having very similar phrasing, the same kind of imagery used, same kind of theme, and even in some cases exact wording, it's so dubious, and it makes me, it really winds me up, and it's becoming an issue. It's always been an issue, but there are some poets out there who almost make a joke out of it, and say that that's the poet's way. Yes, poets do steal lines, and they do this. No, it totally sucks. And there are so many people like you. You know, you're working so hard on your writing, and it's galling that there are other people who are trying to get some kind of free pass. You know, pet peeve there, Damien. Don't plagiarize. If you're out there, don't do it. Don't think about it. Don't copy. Don't crib. Write your own words.
That's the thing. And when I come across, I was just in the garden today, I was reading Anne Tannum, her latest collection, Dismantle. And, every other page, there was just this way of expressing something, or this word that I had to go and look up in the dictionary. And I love when it's that. I have a notebook and I jot down, it's a new word, and it's the word of the day. But what I love is that, wow, look at that. And, I suppose for a moment there's that thing of, oh, I wish I'd wrote it. I haven't, but it's that thing of somebody has wrote that, somebody has worked on that, somebody has found that. That's wonderful. Now, I wonder what I can go off and do that someday maybe someone will come on and read one of my poems and go, oh, wow, he's found that. And I want them to have that same thing, as opposed to have this thing of, oh, well, that sounds very much like your one, doesn't it? Like, it almost... I always think of poetry as sort of like sculpting, like chiseling it down. I'm only learning that now after years and years of writing. Oh, there's an editing process. It's not done when you finish your first draft. Okay. But all of these things, all of these techniques are a part of what makes writing poetry wonderful and exciting, is finding your own way, finding your new words, finding your own way of describing something that someone else hasn't done already, because otherwise it's just boring and dull.
I do think that some people accidentally do it, and I think some people want to learn, so they develop their writing in a certain style. You just have to be careful. I mean, it's a problem, and and the antenna are out.
I'm going to ask you, do you have another peeve? Because I am conscious of time, and I would like to make sure that we allow this opportunity, we give you this platform to unleash the peeves, to not hold back.
Okay. Other pet peeves. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't know if it's a pet peeve. I think it's a bad habit some writers have. Writers who only come onto social media about a week before their book comes out, so they've given it no build-up whatsoever. They've They and their press have worked on this beautiful book. They worked really hard on it, but they probably haven't done any sort of marketing plan. They suddenly come, they probably panic. They come back onto social media about a week prior to it coming out. They suddenly panic and want to be friends with everyone and want to get their book sold, and then about 4 weeks later, they buggered off. And I just think, why didn't you give your book a bit more chance? Yeah, okay, you may be selling it in other ways. You may be selling it in live events, or your press may have a really good distribution list and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just thinking, there's a big world out there. There are a lot of people who could buy your beautiful book that you've slaved over. Why have you only given it a week or two before? And also people who inform everyone about their book about a day before it comes out. I'm staggered. I'm staggered by that, because it takes so much effort doing a book. I know it's firsthand. You also do, David. It takes such a lot of effort. I don't get it when people are so poor at marketing their work, and then presses, they'll give that book 1 week, and it's suddenly on Instagram and Twitter, and it's on a distribution list, and you see it, and then wham, they're on to their next project. And you think, what is the point? Crying out loud. And give your book give it some energy.
And for the majority of people, I think, especially if it's a first, this is kind of a lifelong dream to, this is a big thing. And, even if it's not the first, if it's the second or third, like, I think every time you pick up a book and it has, it has your name on it, it's like, this is like sharing a part of yourself. And I'm in complete agreement.
And now it's time for our final guest on the podcast today, a voice who's very familiar to the podcast and also to Matt, who's also called Matt, and Black Bough Poetry published his debut collection last year called Street Sailing. This is a richly evocative, Bristol-born, London dweller that is Matt Gilbert.
Hello, I'm Matt Gilbert, and I'd like to thank Damien for inviting me to join the Storms again as a guest. I'm going to read 3 poems, 2 by me and 1 by someone who's been a great mentor and friend. First up, Peckham Cherries. This was recently published in issue 12 of Northern Gravy, which you can find online. Peckham Cherries. London sprawl, face presses on early train windows. Wet clay tongue drooling down the glass, leering at the first wave of a new day's work migrations. By 10, carriages are empty, but services keep coming, clanking to the centre from the south. Elevated above the suburbs, they shudder past city body parts, revealing stretch marks, wrinkles, scars and cracks. Block by block, house, then flat, then corner shop. Some boarded, waiting to be levelled, wincing in the glare of constant reinvention, as impatient new builds sneak up on stranded pubs. Elsewhere, sullen silver boxes loom over once proud spires, the architectural weight of history piling in on land that once was wood or glade and meadow, sloping down towards the Thames. Old smoke's bones reduced to rumour, preserved in ink on crinkled maps, stashed in the bottom drawers of local libraries. Except on days when green still rises, as on one March morning just past Queen's Road, Peckham, when 2 lines of cherry trees slipped through tarmac, blossom rounded like pink speech bubbles emerging from the mouths of stick-thin drunks, crying out against the stark of city living, bursting up from under brick and steel and concrete, a defiant shriek of spring. Next, from my 2023 collection, Street Sailing, published by Black Bough Poetry, I'm going to read Aurochs. Aurochs. Behind glass it might be sculpted. The backlit, borrowed skull throws sharp, curved shadow over ages. Forehead retaining the stone axe head, once smashed with fear-fueled force between its eyes by a someone unaware this undoing act would stick there for millennia. A fragment of the weapon crack-lodged as if grown. Shh. Listen. This colossal bone lump sings, essence bursting to slip the case, set horned gods twitching as reskinned it runs back out into the open. Hooves rising, pound a fatal drum. Wind whistles, nostrils flare, blood fires. Prehistoric beast, awake. Lastly, this one is by the energy force that is Matthew M.C. Smith. This is from his book, The Keeper of Eons. Fault wound, Baconhole Cave, Gower. In the slough of wide tide light, in the boom, I'm thrust to the shingle chamber, tip-touch the brail of rock, and heave into the air, crouched before a fault wound, an earthen scar. Step the green shelves, where shadows wind and kinks of light kick as cup marks bubble from a riven roof. Lucence of fronds, verdant ferns quiver in draughts of the slanting vault. I scratch cave beds, barely print my feet in dust. A cave wreck of ice age bones. Bison, elk, hyena. Flints worked in halos of fire. A scattered horde before the flood, before Eden, beneath the blinding of sky-high ice. Thank you very much.
I was wondering in terms of the difference between, so as you said, like Origin 21 Poems came out, you self-published, it arrived, and you wanted to have, like a calling card. It's an astonishing calling card. And the poem about your daughters in it, I think, is one of a poem that I go back to all the time. It's a beautiful, beautifully crafted piece. But what was it like then with The Keeper of Aeons? What was it like then working with Broken Spine, working with Alan? There was a great campaign. And I think also with Black Bough, you're already doing these campaigns. It's not just, like you said, it's not just this is coming out next week. We're aware there's a teaser, there's trailers, there's promos. What was that difference like then?
Oh, it's huge. If you get a really proactive press, and what I've noticed is that some of the indie presses can be better than some of the bigger presses, some of the more established presses. I was very fortunate because Alan Parry was a very honest editor. He didn't change too much, but he did notice small faults, small typos, and I think with him, he was very focused on presentation, on cover, and I think sadly, although it seems stupid because it should be about words, I think cover is so massive And if writers have a bad cover, it's really hard. It can be really off-putting for possible readers. But Alan was extremely meticulous about the presentation, the order stuff, like fonts. He had a designer, like a proper designer. He looked at videos. We actually had like a marketing campaign, which was very, very much a joint effort. But we looked at all of the testimonies we get, the reviews. I think we reached far and wide. But what Alan was really good at was like scheduled posts across at least three social media platforms. And bless him, he was posting out to Australia, America. I did handwritten poems. I think what we gave was noise, loads and loads and loads of noise. We gave it its best chance to get out there. So it was just extremely different. And the Keeper of Eons, I think, is, for me, I was very, very, very pleased. I'm very, very pleased with the book. I think we were suitably ruthless. I am really proud of that one. And I think it's because of the presentation. I do think it looks really, really, really good.
Can I ask you about the inclusion of the prose poems? Like that's what intrigued me. And so prior to this, like throughout sort of, knowing you and getting to know you, I've read, a number of your prose pieces, and I've always been deeply affected. I remember I can't remember the name of it, but I think it was a Top Tweet Tuesday that you actually put it. It was about you as a kid, and it was about Star Wars and space travel, and always stuck in my mind. And what I thought then, reading the full collection was extraordinary, was that while in 21 Poems, it was very much, it's poetry, it's, standard as you expect. Yeah. And with Black Bow poetry, very often it was, 11 lines or 12 lines. It's
very much
short and sweet. And then suddenly with Keeper of Eons, like you have, these pages of these wonderful explorations. How did that was that something new for you? Was that something different?
I think after I got confidence and after I actually started to publish pieces of poetry, I started to experiment with I suppose reasonably short prose pieces, creative nonfiction. And I find it more freeing, although I'm definitely more of a poet. I suppose when I wrote at length, maybe 500 words or 1,000 words about childhood stuff, I just found that the imagination could go absolutely rampant. Whereas although my imagination goes rampant in poems, I also want very sharp constraint. At times, I want those times where people are stopped in their tracks, hopefully. But with the prose pieces, I do think there's more freedom. And what I wanted to do was kind of insert more popular culture in there, more memories, more random stuff, surreal stuff, as well as like hyper real. I mean, it makes me think almost about your Aldi piece, your piece about going shopping with your mum to Aldi, which is it's an extraordinary piece of writing, and that is a very good example of where someone's imagination has gone absolutely rampant. And I think in the prose pieces that I've got in this book, it's just a different approach. It's a different creative approach. It's a different challenge, but I do hope they are very, very poetic, because that's something I don't ever want to lose. I want people to feel that there's that charge, that kind of poetic charge. And again, coming back to you, that's something with your writing is there's this kind of stored up charge, which just in these poems or prose, it just explodes outwards. And in that sense, although we're very different, I think we're very similar. in terms of what like our energy,
Mhm.
the energy of our work.
It's funny because I think we're both, even, possibly on the edge of sort of overworked, and we'll always be happily overworked, we don't want to have like too much of quiet times, but we have generally tried to be positive in our outlooks and what's possible and what we can do. And yet when we get down to our writing, I think one of the things that we do about Chair is this sense of memory, this sense of like, and I'm going to say deep time, this sense of going back, traveling back, being shockingly revealing, where I think sometimes in our everyday life, we're sort of, a bit jazz hands and, oh, it's all great.
Yeah.
And here's another platform and here's something else we're going to do. But then you come through your collection and there are these very careful, very detailed, very gentle, very traumatic experiences that we find a way to put down on a page that probably we wouldn't be able to express just in a simple conversation.
I'm now thinking both of us should co-write something, because I think what's interesting is that we are really different, but I think the same energy and the discipline is there. I think, without feeling sorry for myself, I think both of us have different traumas, and I think we're quite open about that. And there's some things I have explored, there's some things that I haven't, and I'm sure that's very, very similar with you. But there is this energy. I think, we are like lively jazz hands, silly fun on social media, and that is a deliberate thing. It's a deliberate thing to make poetry less bloody boring, and to have noise and to have energy, like you see in music and art. Poetry can still be stuffy and extremely dull. So I think we try to counteract that, and that's everything that you do with your podcasts, and your books, and whenever you're presenting something, there's just so much in there. I think I do it in similar ways as well, but I think on the opposite side of that, we're deeply serious writers, and we're not afraid of tackling extremely difficult subjects. But I think both of us try to be sensitive about that. When I do, I'm always thinking trigger warnings, and also just content, thinking about how to present your content. And I think you can present almost anything with figurative language. I think the power of metaphor is that you can broach all sorts of things, but often no one has any idea.
Yeah. But I was just going to say, like, in terms of looking through who you've published, you've also have a huge diversity of voice. But I think there's a commonality of them all, that there is a richness to the willingness to share some of the darkest moments. But if I look at the people who are sharing, from like Matt Gilbert to Sarah Connor, MS Evans, and even dear, unfortunately departed Di Fry, extraordinary lights, in between all of that darkness, these extraordinary lights, like, on social media, in terms of, supporting other people. These are beautiful, vibrant, important people who I think are a massive part of our community, but who have been drawn to you for some reason. And I think it's a huge credit to you. It's a huge credit to the bow. And I think huge congratulations to you.
Thank you. I think that you also see that in your press. I've been very fortunate to be published by you, and you want all shades of light and darkness in there, and you want shock and you want surprise. You want, I think, every type of emotional tone in your work. So I think the Storms Journal, in my opinion, is one that should be read even wider and credited even wider, because the production quality, the presentation of your mag, it's so glossy. it's in many ways much, much glossier than many of the things that I do. And I'm not just saying that just because I'm on your podcast, Damien. I genuinely, I think we are very, very, very similar. I think sometimes you're more lyrical, but I do genuinely think that we're probably striving for quite similar things, which is complex, subtle work. And in all of those people that you mentioned, and people like M.S. Evans and Rachel Deering, who I'm currently publishing, and then the future ones looking at James, Louise, and all of the other people, there's that kind of dark energy, isn't there? And that's what both of us look for. We don't want anything humdrum. We don't want anything average. And I don't mean to be cruel saying that, but we're always striving to look for something that literally makes us take a breath. And when something comes into my inbox when I have a submission, and someone sends you something so politely, it's often so humble and polite, maybe, and often someone who isn't published, there's that more raw intensity there. But quite honestly, sometimes you literally go, where the hell did that come from? How did they think of that? And that's the joy of it.
Yeah,
that's the weird joy. And sometimes they haven't sent you joyful stuff, but it's a joy to get it, and to be able to platform it, and then put it forward for the push card, which you've had, haven't you, before? Put it forward for Best of the Net. The forward prize is a huge step for me. I've got 3 writers being put forward for the forward prize. If I get there next year taking my writers, you, Damien, are going to make me a suit, right? I'm going to have a pimp top hat and a proper cane. I promise you.
Okay. I better book a trip to Wales, over to Swansea, just to get some measurements, get it sorted out, allow some room for some beer just in case that's needed. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today on Eat the Storms. It is an honor. I am in awe.
Pleasure.
We are all in awe. Congratulations. Keep going forward.
Thank you. I mean, it's been brilliant.
Poetic peeps and gentle persons, in-betweeners and nonconformers, genders all and genders equal. We've reached the end of this very special episode of Eat the Storms, the poetry podcast. And today we were celebrating Matthew MC Smith, Black Bow Poetry, Top Tweet Tuesday, and all things wonderful and Welsh. My name is Damien B. Donnelly. I've been your host and producer, and thank you so much for tuning in on platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts, iTunes, Amazon Music, and YouTube. For full details on all about the Bard of the Bow, head on over to www.eatthestorms.com. Click on the podcast section called Listen to the Podcast, and there you'll find a blog post for every episode. This was episode 17, season 8, and in that blog post you will find links in order to find, follow, and be a fan of Matthew MC Smith, to figure out all about Top Tweet Tuesday, and to find out all about Black Bow Poetry. And of course, while you're there, you will also find links to my wonderful, sensational special guests on this episode today who made it all possible. And they have been Matt Gilbert, Sarah Connor, Ness Owen, Marcel Newbold, Mark Anthony Owen, Andy McGregor, Julian Day, Meryl D. Smith, Jack B. Bedell, and Rona Green. And so that is it for another season of Eat the Storms, a poetry podcast. Although I say that's it for another season, but as I said at the top of today's episode, we have some Pride specials coming your way, and one of them will be our annual Poetic Pride Party, which will drop on Friday the 28th of June. And if you're a poet or even a singer-songwriter and want to take part, there is still some space left in that special episode. Later on this summer, we will be opening submissions to the Storms Journal, issue 4 of our Journal of Poetry, Prose and Visual Arts, so keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. And at the end of this summer and the beginning of autumn, we will be back with season 9, and I'm already taking names for the guest list, so feel free to drop me an email at eatthestorms@yahoo.com. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you so much to all of you for tuning in, for sharing, for cheering, for encouraging. We are at almost 700 international guests who have taken part in this tiny little podcast that I started back in July 2020 when my own pamphlet Eat the Storms was coming out, and I thought no one's going to know about it, and then in the middle of a panic attack I decided to start a podcast. And here we are, almost 4 years later, still connected and still going strong. Thank you so much to all of you. And until we meet again, stay